As tape and film reveal, in the month following the expansion of the walls bracketing the bookshelves, Billy Reston made several trips to the house where, despite all efforts to the contrary, he continued to confirm the confounding impossibility of an interior dimension greater than an exterior one. Navidson skillfully captures Reston's mental frustration by focusing on the physical impediments his friend must face within a house not designed with the disabled in mind. Since the area in question is in the master bedroom, Reston must make his way upstairs each time he wishes to inspect the area. On the first visit, Tom volunteers to try and carry him. "That won't be necessary," Reston grunts, effortlessly swinging out of his chair and dragging himself up to the second story using only his arms. "You got a pair of guns there, don't you, partner?" The engineer is only slightly winded. "Too bad you forgot your chair," Tom adds dryly. Reston looks up in disbelief, a little surprised, maybe even a bit shocked, and then bursts out laughing. "Well, and fuck you." In the end, Navidson is the one who hauls up the wheelchair. Note: yesterday I managed to get Mouse Fife Harris on the phone. She is a UC Irvine PhD candidate in Comp Lit who apparently always objected to the large chunks of narratives Zampano kept asking her to write down. I told him all those passages were inappropriate for critical work, and if he were in my class, I'd mark him down for it. But he'd just chuckle and continue. It bothered me a little, but the guy wasn't my student, and he was blind and old, so why should I care? Still, I did care, so I'd always protest when he asked me to write down a new bit of narrative. "Why won't you listen to me?" I demanded one time. "You're writing like a freshman." And he replied, I remember this very distinctly, "We always look for doctors, but sometimes we're lucky to find a frosh." And then he chuckled again and pressed on. Not a bad way to respond to this whole fucking book, if you ask me. End note. Still, no matter how many times Reston wheels from the children's bedroom to the master bedroom, or how carefully he examines the strange closet space, the bookshelves, or the various tools Tom and Will have been measuring the house with, he can provide no reasonable explanation for what he keeps referring to as a goddamn spatial rape. By June, as the date on the High 8 tape indicates, the problem still remains unsolved. Tom, however, realizes he cannot afford to stay any longer and asks Reston to give him a lift to Charlottesville, where he can catch a ride up to Dulles. It is a bright summer morning when we watch Tom emerge from the house. He gives Karen a quick kiss goodbye and then kneels down to present Chad and Daisy with a set of neon yellow dart guns. "Remember, kids," he tells them sternly, "don't shoot each other. Aim at the fragile, expensive stuff." Navidson gives his brother a lasting hug. "I'll miss you, man." "You got a phone," Tom grins. "It even rings," Navidson adds without missing a beat. While there is no question the tone of this exchange is jocular and perhaps even slightly combative, what matters most here is unspoken. The way Tom's cheeks burn with a sudden flush of color, or the way Navidson quickly tries to wipe something from his eyes. Certainly the long, lingering shot of Tom as he tosses his duffel bag in the back of Reston's van, waving the camera goodbye, reveals to us just how much affection Navidson feels for his brother. Strangely enough, following Tom's departure, communication between Navidson and Karen begins to radically deteriorate. An unusual quiet descends on the house. Karen refuses to speak about the anomaly. She brews coffee, calls her mother in New York, brews more coffee, and keeps track of the real estate market in the classifieds. Frustrated by her unwillingness to discuss the implications of their strange living quarters, Navidson retreats to the downstairs study, reviewing photographs, tapes, even, as a few stills reveal, compiling a list of possible experts, government agencies, newspapers, periodicals, and television shows they might want to approach. At least both he and Karen agree on one thing: they want the children to stay out of the house. Unfortunately, since neither Chad nor Daisy has had a real opportunity to make any new friends in Virginia, they keep to themselves, romping around the backyard, shouting, screaming, stinging into each other with darts, until eventually they drift farther and farther out into the neighborhood for increasingly longer spates of time. Neither Karen nor Navidson seems to notice. The alienation of their children finally becomes apparent to both of them one evening, in the middle of July. Karen is upstairs, sitting on the bed, playing with a deck of tarot cards. Navidson is downstairs in his study, examining several slides returned from the lab. News of Oliver North's annulled conviction plays on the TV. In the background, we can hear Chad and Daisy squealing about something, their voices pealing through the house, the strained music of their play threatening at any instant to turn into a brawl. With superb cross-cutting, Navidson depicts how both he and Karen react to the next moment. Karen has drawn another card from the deck, but instead of adding it to the cross slowly forming before her crossed legs, the occult image hangs unseen in the air, frozen between her two fingers. Karen's eyes are already diverted, concentrating on a sound, a new sound, almost out of reach, but reaching her just the same. Navidson is much closer. His children's cries immediately tell him that they are way out of bounds. Karen has only just started to head downstairs, calling out for Chad and Daisy, her agitation and panic increasing with every step, when Navidson bolts out of the study and races for the living room. The terrifying implication of their children's shouts is now impossible to miss. No room in the house exceeds a length of 25 feet, let alone 50 feet, let alone 56.5 feet. And yet Chad and Daisy's voices are echoing, each call responding with an entirely separate answer. In the living room, Navidson discovers the echoes emanating from a dark, doorless hallway, which has appeared out of nowhere in the west wall. Note: there's a problem here concerning the location of the 5.5-minute hallway. Initially, the doorway was supposed to be on the north wall of the living room, page 4, but now, as you can see for yourself, that position has changed. Maybe it's a mistake. Maybe there's some underlying logic to the shift. Fuck if I know. Your guess is as good as mine. End note. Without hesitating, Navidson plunges in after them. Unfortunately, the living room high 8 cannot follow him, nor for that matter can Karen. She freezes on the threshold, unable to push herself into the darkness toward the faint flicker of light within. Fortunately, she does not have to wait too long. Navidson soon reappears with Chad and Daisy in each arm, both of them still clutching a homemade candle, their faces lit like sprites on a winter's eve. This is the first sign of Karen's chronic disability. Up until now, there has never been even the slightest indication that she suffers from crippling claustrophobia. By the time Navidson and the two children are safe and sound in the living room, Karen is drenched in sweat. She hugs and holds them as if they had just narrowly avoided some terrible fate, even though neither Chad nor Daisy seems particularly disturbed by their little adventure. In fact, they want to go back. Perhaps because of Karen's evident distress, Navidson agrees to at least temporarily make this new addition to their house off limits. For the rest of the night, Karen keeps a tight grip on Navidson. Even when they finally slip into bed, she is still holding his hand. Navy, promise me you won't go in there again. Let's see if it's even here in the morning. It will be. She lays her head down flat on his chest and begins to cry. I love you so much. Please promise me. Please. Whether it is the lasting flush of terror still in Karen's cheeks, or her absolute need for him, so markedly different from her frequently aloof posture, Navidson cradles her in his arms like a child, and promises. Since the release of the Navidson record, Virginia Posa has written extensively about Karen Green's adolescent years. Posa's thin volume entitled Wishing Well, Cambridge, Massachusetts, Harvard University Press, 1996, represents one of the few works which, while based on the Navidson's experience, still manages to stand on its own merits outside of the film. Along with Kate Chopin, Sylvia Plath, Toni Morrison, Autobiography of a Schizophrenic Girl, The True Story of Renee, Francesca Bloch's Weetzie Bat books, to Mary Pipher's Reviving Ophelia, and more importantly, Carol Gilligan's landmark work, In a Different Voice, Psychological Theory and Women's Development, Posa has spent hundreds of hours researching the early life of Karen Green, analyzing the cultural forces shaping her personality, ultimately uncovering a remarkable difference between the child she once was and the woman she eventually became. In her introduction, page 15, Posa provides this brief overview. When Diderot told the teenage Sophie Volin, "You all die at 15, he could have been speaking to Karen Green, who at 15 did die. To behold Karen as a child is nearly as ghostly an experience as the house itself. Old family films capture her athletic zeal, her unguarded smiles, the tomboy spirit which sends her racing through the muddy flats of a recently drained pond. She's awkward, a little clumsy, but rarely self-conscious, even when covered in mud." Former teachers claim she frequently expressed a desire to be president, a nuclear physicist, a surgeon, even a professional hockey player. All her choices reflected unattenuated self-confidence, a remarkably healthy sign for a 13-year-old girl. Along with superb classwork, she excelled in extracurricular activities. She loved planning surprise parties, working on school productions, and even on occasion taking on a schoolyard bully with a bout of fists. Karen Green was exuberant, feisty, charming, independent, spontaneous, sweet, and most of all, fearless. By the time she turned 15, all of that was gone. She hardly spoke in class. She refused to function in any sort of school event, and rather than discuss her feelings, she deferred the world with a hard and perfectly practiced smile. Apparently, if her sister is to be believed, Karen spent every night of her 14th year composing that smile in front of a blue plastic-handled mirror. Tragically, her creation proved flawless, and though her near aphonia should have alarmed any adept teacher or guidance counselor, it was invariably rewarded with the Pyrrhic prize of high school popularity. Though Posa goes on to discuss the cultural aspects and consequences of beauty, these details in particular are most disturbing, especially in light of the fact that little of their history appears in the film. Considering the substantial coverage present in the Navidson record, it is unsettling to discover such a glaring omission. In spite of the enormous quantity of home footage obviously available, for some reason calamities of the past still do not appear. Clearly, Karen's personal life, to say nothing of his own life, caused Navidson too much anxiety to portray either one particularly well in his film. Rather than delve into the pathology of Karen's claustrophobia, Navidson chose instead to focus strictly on the house. Note: fortunately, a few years before the Navidson record was made, Karen took part in a study which promised to evaluate and possibly treat her fear. After the film became something of a phenomenon, those results surfaced and were eventually published in a number of periodicals. The Anomic Meg, based out of Berkeley, Volume 87, Number 7, April 1995, offered the most comprehensive account of that study as it pertained to Karen Green. Subject number 0027008785, Karen Green, suffers severe panic attacks when confronting dark enclosed spaces, usually windowless and unknown, e.g. a dark room in an unfamiliar building. The attacks are consistently characterized by 1. Accelerated heart rate, 2. Sweating, 3. Trembling, 4. Sensation of suffocation, 5. Feeling of choking, 6. Chest pain, 7. Severe dizziness, 8. Derealization, feelings of unreality, and eventual depersonalization, being detached from oneself, 9. Culmination in an intense fear of dying. See DSM-4, Criteria for Panic Attack. Diagnosis: subject suffers from specific phobia, formerly known as simple phobia. Situational type. See DSM-4, Diagnostic Criteria for 300.29, Specific Phobia. Because behavioral cognitive techniques have thus far failed to modify perspectives on anxiety-provoking stimuli, subject was considered ideal for current pharmacotherapy study. Initially, subject received between 100 to 200 milligrams per day of tofranil, imipramine, but with no improvement, switched early on to a beta-adrenergic blocker, propranolol. An increase in vivid nightmares caused her to switch again to an MAOI, monoamine oxidase inhibitor, tranylcypromine. Still dissatisfied with the results, subject switched to the SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, fluoxetine, commonly known as Prozac. Subject responded well and soon showed increased tolerance when intentionally exposed to enclosed dark spaces. Unfortunately, moderate weight gain and orgasmic dysfunction caused the subject to drop out of the study. Subject apparently relies now on her own phobia avoidance mechanisms, choosing to stay clear of enclosed, unknown spaces, i.e. elevators, basements, unfamiliar closets, etc., etc. Though occasionally, when attacks become more frequent, she returns to Prozac for short periods of time. See David Kahn's article, Simple Phobias, the Failure of Pharmacological Intervention. Also see subject's results on Sheehan Clinician-Rated Anxiety Scale, as well as Sheehan Phobia Scale. Subnote. See Exhibit 6. End subnote. While the report seems fairly comprehensive, there is admittedly one point which remains utterly perplexing. Other publications repeat verbatim the ambiguous phrasing, but still fail to shed light on the exact meaning of those 6 words. Occasionally when attacks become more frequent. At least the implication seems clear. Vicissitudes in Karen's life, whatever those may be, affect her sensitivity to space. In her article, Significant O.T. Her, published in The Psychology Quarterly, Volume 142, Number 17, December 1995, page 453, Celine Berezin, MD, observes that Karen's attacks, which I suspect stem from early adolescent betrayal, increased proportionally with the level of intimacy, or even the threat of potential intimacy, she experiences, whether with Will Navidson or even her children. Also see Steve Sokol and Julia Carter's Women Who Can't Love, When a Woman's Fear Makes Her Run from Commitment, and What a Smart Man Can Do About It. New Hampshire, T. Devons and Company, 1978. End note. Of course, by the following morning, Karen has already molded her desperation into a familiar pose of indifference. She does not seem to care when they discover the hallway has not vanished. She keeps her arms folded, no longer clinging to Navidson's hand, or stroking her children. She removes herself from her family's company by saying very little, while at the same time maintaining a semblance of participation with a smile. Virginia Posa is right. Karen's smile is tragic because, in spite of its meaning, it succeeds in remaining so utterly beautiful. The 5.5-minute hallway in the Navidson record differs slightly from the bootleg copy which appeared in 1990. For one thing, in addition to the continuous circumambulating shot, a wider selection of shots has made the coverage of the sequence much more thorough and fluid. For another, the hallway has shrunk. This was impossible to see in the VHS copy because there was no point of comparison. Now, however, it is perfectly clear that the hallway, which was well over 60 feet deep when the children entered it, is now a little less than 10 feet. Context also significantly alters the 5.5-minute hallway. A greater sense of the Navidsons and their friends, and how they all interact with the house, adds the greatest amount of depth to this quietly evolving enigma. Their personalities almost crowd that place, and suddenly too, as an abrupt jump cut redelivers Tom from Massachusetts and Billy Reston from Charlottesville, the UVA professor once again wheeling around the periphery of the angle, unable to take his eyes off the strange, dark corridor. Unlike the Twilight Zone, however, or some other like cousin where understanding comes neat and fast, i.e. this is clearly a door to another dimension, or this is a passage to another world with directions, the hallway offers no answers. The monolith, in 2001, seems the most appropriate cinematic analog, incontrovertibly there, but virtually inviolate to interpretation. Note: consider Drew Bluth's Summer Passage in Architectural Digest, Volume 50, Number 10, October 1993, page 30. End note. Similarly, the hallway also remains meaningless, though it is most assuredly not without effect. As Navidson threatens to re-enter it for a closer inspection, Karen reiterates her previous plea and injunction with a sharp and abrupt rise in pitch. The ensuing tension is more than temporary. Navidson has always been an adventurer, willing to risk his personal safety in the name of achievement. Karen, on the other hand, remains the standard-bearer of responsibility and is categorically against risks, especially those which might endanger her family or her happiness. Tom also shies from danger, preferring to turn over a problem to someone else, ideally a police officer, fireman, or other state-paid official. Without sound or movement, but by presence alone, the hallway creates a serious rift in the Navidson household. Bazin Nauduk suggests that the hallway exudes a conflict-creating force. It's those oily walls radiating badness which maneuver Karen and Will into that nonsensical fight. Note: Bazin Nauduk's The Bad Bodhi Wall, Marina del Rey, Bix Oikofo Publishing House, 1995, page 91, endnote. Nauduk's argument reveals a rather tedious mind. She feels a need to invent some non-existent dark force to account for all ill will, instead of recognizing the dangerous influence the unknown naturally has on everyone. A couple of weeks pass. Karen privately puzzles over the experience, but says very little. The only indication that the hallway has in some way intruded on her thoughts is her newfound interest in feng shui. In the film, we can make out a number of books lying around the house, including The Elements of Feng Shui by Kwok Man-ho and Joanne O'Brien, Element Books, Shaftesbury, 1991, Feng Shui Handbook, A Practical Guide to Chinese Geomancy and Environmental Harmony by Derek Walters, Aquarium Press, 1991, Interior Design and Feng Shui by Sarah Rosbach, Ryder, London, 1987, and the I Ching, or Book of Changes, 3rd edition, translated by Richard Wilhelm, Routledge and Keegan Paul, 1968. There is a particularly tender moment as Chad sits with his mother in the kitchen. She is busily determining the Kua number, a calculation based on the year of birth, for everyone in the family, while he is carefully making a peanut butter and honey sandwich. "Mummy," Chad says quietly after a while. "How do I get to become president when I grow up?" Karen looks up from her notebook, quite unexpectedly, and with the simplest question. Her son has managed to move her. "You study hard at school and keep doing what you're doing. Then you can be whatever you want." Chad smiles. "When I'm president, can I make you vice president?" Karen's eyes shine with affection. Putting aside her feng shui studies, she reaches over and gives Chad a big kiss on his forehead. "How about Secretary of Defense?" During all this, Tom earns his keep by installing a door to close off the hallway. First, he mounts a wood frame using some of the tools he brought from Lowell and a few more he rented from the local hardware store. Then he hangs a single door with 24-gauge hot-dipped galvanized steel skins and an acoustical performance rating coded at ASTM E41370T SDC28. Last but not least, he puts in 4 Schlager deadbolts and color codes the 4 separate keys: red, yellow, green, and blue. For a while, Daisy keeps him company, though it remains hard to determine whether she is more transfixed by Tom or the hallway. At one point, she walks up to the threshold and lets out a little yelp, but the cry just flattens and dies in the narrow corridor. Tom seems noticeably relieved when he finally shuts the door and turns over the 4 locks. Unfortunately, as he twists the last key, the accompanying sound contains a familiar ring. He grips the red Kai and tries it again. As the deadbolt glances the strike plate, the resulting click creates an unexpected and very unwelcome echo. Slowly, Tom unlocks the door and peers inside. Somehow, and for whatever reason, the thing has grown again. Intermittently, Navidson opens the door himself and stares down the hallway, sometimes using a flashlight, sometimes just studying the darkness itself. "What do you do with that?" Navidson asks his brother one evening. "Move," Tom replies. Sadly, even with the unnatural darkness now locked behind a steel door, Karen and Navidson still continue to say very little to each other, their own feelings seemingly as impossible for them to address as the meaning of the hallway itself. Chad accompanies his mother to town as she searches for various feng shui objects guaranteed to change the energy of the home, while Daisy follows her father around the house as he paces from room to room, talking vehemently on the phone with Reston, trying to come up with a feasible and acceptable way to investigate the phenomenon lurking in his living room, until finally, in the middle of all this, he lifts his daughter onto his shoulders. Unfortunately, as soon as Karen returns, Navidson sets Daisy back down on the floor and retreats to the study to continue his discussions alone. With domestic tensions proving a little too much to stomach, Tom escapes to the garage where he works for a while on a dollhouse he has started to build for Daisy. Note: see Louis Marsano's Tom's 1865 Shelter in This Old House, September-October 1995, page 87, endnote. Until eventually he takes a break, drifting out to the backyard to get high and hot in the sun, pointedly walking around the patch of lawn the hallway should, for all intents and purposes, occupy. Before long, both Chad and Daisy are sidling up to this great bear snoring under a tree, and even though they start to tie his shoelaces together, tickle his nostrils with long blades of grass, or use a mirror to focus the sun on his nose, Tom remains remarkably patient. He almost seems to enjoy their mischief, growling, yawning, playing along, putting both of them in a headlock, Chad and Daisy laughing hysterically, until finally all three are exhausted and snoozing into dusk. Considering the complexity of Karen and Navidson's relationship, it is fortunate our understanding of their problems is not left entirely up to interpretation. Some of their respective views and feelings are revealed in their video journal entries. Sex, 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 Karen whispers into her camcorder. It was like we just met when we got here. The kids would go out and we'd fuck in the kitchen, in the shower. We even did it in the garage. But ever since that closet thing appeared, I can't. I don't know why. It terrifies me. On the same subject, Navidson offers a similar view. When we first moved here, Karen was like a college co-ed, anywhere, anytime. Now, all of a sudden, she refuses to be touched. I kiss her, she practically starts to cry. And it all started when we got back from Seattle. Note: nor does it seem to help that Navidson and Karen both have among their books Erica Jong's Fear of Flying, New York, Holt, Reinhardt and Winston, 1973, and Hooper's The Ultimate Sex Book, A Therapist's Guide to the Programs and Techniques That Will Enhance Your Relationship and Transform Your Life, DK Publishing, 1992, XY's Broken Daisy Chains, Seattle, Town Overall Press, 1989, Chris Allen's 1001 Sex Secrets Every Man Should Know, New York, Avon Books, 1995, as well as Chris Allen's 1001 Sex Secrets Every Woman Should Know, New York, Avon Books, 1995. End note. But the division between them is not just physical. Karen again. Doesn't he see I don't want him going in there because I love him? You don't need to be a genius to realize there's something really bad about that place. Navy, don't you see that? Navidson. The only thing I want to do is go in there. But she's adamant that I don't, and I love her, so I won't. But, well, it's just killing me. Maybe because I know this is all about her fears, her anxieties. She hasn't even given a thought to what I care about. Until finally, the lack of physical intimacy and emotional understanding leads both of them to make privately voiced ultimatums. Karen, but I will say this, if he goes in there, I'm out of here, kids and all. Navidson, if she keeps up this cold front, you bet I'm going in there. Then one night in early August, note, Zampano provided the blanks, but never filled them in. End note. And the equally famous drop in for dinner. It is a complete coincidence that they happen to be in DC at the same time, but neither one seems to mind the presence of the other. As said, any friend of Navy's is a friend of mine. Navidson and Karen have known both of them for quite a few years, so the evening is light-hearted and filled with plenty of amusing stories. Clearly Karen and Navidson relish the chance to reminisce a little about some good times when things seemed a lot less complicated. Perhaps a little starstruck, Tom says very little. There is plenty of opportunity for a glass of wine, but he proves himself by keeping to water, though he does excuse himself from the table once to smoke a joint outside. Much to Tom's surprise and delight, joins him. As the evening progresses, harps a little on Navidson's newfound domesticity. No more crazy Navy, eh? Are those days gone for good? I remember when you party all night, shoot all morning, and then spend the rest of the day developing your film. In a closet with just a bucket and a bulb if you had to. I'm willing to bet you don't even have a darkroom here. Which is just a little too much for Navidson to bear. Here, you want to see a darkroom? I'll show you a darkroom. Don't you dare, Navy, Karen immediately cries. Come on, Karen, they're our friends, Navidson says, leading the two celebrities into the living room, where he instructs them to look out the window so they can see for themselves his ordinary backyard. Satisfied that they understand nothing but trees and lawn could possibly lie on the other side of the wall, he retrieves the 4 colored keys hidden in the antique bassinet in the foyer. Everyone is pretty tipsy, and the general mood is so friendly and easy, it seems impossible to disturb. Which of course all changes when Navidson unlocks the door and reveals the hallway. Takes one look at that dark place and retreats into the kitchen. 10 minutes later, is gone. Steps up to the threshold, points Navidson's flashlight at the walls and floor, and then retires to the bathroom. A little later, is also gone. Karen is so enraged by the whole incident, she makes Navidson sleep on the couch with his beloved hallway. No surprise, Navidson fails to fall asleep. He tosses around for an hour until he finally gets up and goes off in search of his camera. A title card reads Exploration A. The timestamp on Navidson's camcorder indicates that it is exactly 3:19 a.m. Call me impetuous or just curious, we hear him mutter as he shoves his sore feet into a pair of boots. But a little look around isn't going to hurt. Without ceremony, he unlocks the door and slips across the threshold, taking with him only a Hi8, a Maglite, and his 35mm Nikon. The commentary he provides us with remains very spare. Cold. Wow, really cold. Walls are dark, similar to the closet space upstairs. Within a few seconds he reaches the end. The hallway cannot be more than 70 feet long. That's it. Nothing else. No big deal. Over this, Karen and I have been fighting. Except, as Navidson swings around, he suddenly discovers a new doorway to the right. It was not there before. What the? Navidson carefully nudges his flashlight into the new darkness and discovers an even longer corridor. This one's easily, I'd say 100 feet. A few seconds later, he comes across a still larger corridor branching off to the left. It is at least 15 feet wide with a ceiling well over 10 feet high. The length of this one, however, is impossible to estimate, as Navidson's flashlight proves useless against the darkness ahead, dying long before it can ever come close to determining an end. Navidson pushes ahead, moving deeper and deeper into the house, eventually passing a number of doorways leading off into alternate passageways or chambers. Here's the door. No lock. A room. Not very big. Empty. No windows. No switches. No outlets. Heading back to the corridor. Leaving the room. It seems colder now. Maybe I'm just getting colder. Here's another door. Unlocked. Another room. Again, no windows. Continuing on. Flashlight and camera skitter across ceiling and floor in loose harmony, stabbing into small rooms, alcoves, or spaces reminiscent of closets, though no shirts hang there. Still, no matter how far Navidson proceeds down this particular passageway, his light never comes close to touching the punctuation point promised by the converging perspective lines, sliding on and on and on, spawning one space after another, a constant stream of corners and walls, all of them unreadable and perfectly smooth. Finally, Navidson stops in front of an entrance much larger than the rest. It arcs high above his head and yawns into an undisturbed blackness. His flashlight finds the floor, but no walls, and, for the first time, no ceiling. Only now do we begin to see how big Navidson's house really is. Something should be said here about Navidson's hand. Out of all the footage he personally shoots, there rarely exists a shake, tremble, jerk, or even a case of poor framing. His camera, no matter the circumstances, manages to view the world, even this world, with a remarkable steadiness, as well as a highly refined aesthetic sensibility. Comparisons immediately make Navidson's strengths apparent. Holloway Roberts' tape is virtually unwatchable, tilted frames, out of focus, shakes, horrible lighting, and finally oblivion when faced with danger. Likewise, Karen and Tom's tapes reflect their inexperience and can only be considered for content. Only the images Navidson shoots capture the otherness inherent in that place. Undeniably, Navidson's experience as a photojournalist gives him an advantage over the rest when focusing on something that is as terrifying as it is threatening. But of course, there is more at work here than just the courage to stand and focus. There is also the courage to face and shape the subject in an extremely original manner. Note: see Liza Speen's Images of Dark, Brassaï's Paris by Night, the tenderly encountered history of rooms in Andrew Bush's Bonnetstown, work of O. Winston Link and Karakin Gortjian, as well as some of the photographs by Lucien Aigné, Osbert Lam, Cass Urthus, Floris M. Neussus, Ashim Ghosh, Annette Lemieux, Irena Ionesco, Cindy Sherman, Edmund Teske, Andreas Feininger, John Vachon, Tetsuya Ichimura, Sandy Skoglund, Yasuhiro Ishimoto, Beaumont Newhall, James Alinder, Robert Rauschenberg, Miyaka Ishiuchi, Alfred Eisentade, Sebastião Ribeiro Salgado, Alfred Stieglitz, Robert Adams, Saul Libson, Huyn Kong, Nick Ut, Lester Talkington, William Henry Jackson, Edward Weston, William Baker, Yusuf Karsh, Adam Clark Vroman, Julia Margaret Cameron, George Barnard, Leonard Nielsen, Herb Ritz, Nancy Bourson, Untitled, 1993, Bragaglia, Henri Cartier-Bresson, Place de l'Europe, William Wegman, Gordon Parks, Alvin Langdon Coburn, Edward Ruscha, Herbert Pointing, Simpson Kalisher, Robert Frank, Baltimore Sun photographer Aubrey Bodine, Charles Gatewood, Ferenc Berko, Leland Rice, Joan Lyons, Robert D'Alessandro, Victor Kepler, Larry Fink, Bevan Davies, Lottie Jacoby, Burke Ousel, George Washington Wilson, Julia Margaret Cameron, Carlton Watkins, Edward S. Curtis, Eve Arnold, Michael Lessie, Wisconsin Death Trip, Aaron Siskind, Kelly Wise, Cornell Kappa, Bert Stern, James Van der Zee, Leonard Freed, Philip Perkis, Keith Smith, Bert Glynn, Bill Brandt, Lajlo Moholy Nagy, Leonard Arthur Rothstein, Louise Stetner, Ray K. Metzger, Edward W. Quigley, Jim Bengston, Richard Prince, Walter Chappell, Paz Edazuriz, Rosamund Wolfe Purcell, E.J. Merry, Gary Winogrand, Alexander Gardner, Wynne Bullock, Neil Slavin, Lou Thomas, Patrick Nagatani, Donald Bloomberg, David Plowden, Ernestine Rubin, Will McBride, David Vestal, Jerry Burchard, George Gardner, Galina Sankova, Frank Golka, Olivia Parker, Charles Traub, Ashvin Mehta, Walter Rosenblum, Bruce Gilden, Imogen Cunningham, Barbara Crane, Louis Baltz, Roger Minnick, George Krause, Saul Leiter, William Horace, Ed Douglas, John Baldessari, Charles Harbut, Greg McGregor, Lillian Deacock, Lilo Raymond, Hero, Don Worth, Peter Magubane, Brett Weston, Jill Friedman, Joanne Leonard, Larry Clark, Nancy Rexroth, Jack Manning, Ben Shan, Marika Sindas, Robert DiMacci, Alexandra Masiauskas, Andrea Serrano, Les Krims, Heinrich Tonnies, George Roger, Art Sinzabal, Arnold Genthe, Frank Major, Gertrude Kassabier, Charles Negre, Harold Edgerton, Shomei Tomatsu, Roy DeCarva, Samuel Bourne, Giuseppe Primoli, Paul Strand, Lewis Hine, William Eggleston, Frank Sutcliffe, Diane Arbus, Daniel Ibis, Raja Lala Dean Dayal, Ralph Eugene Meatyard, Walker Evans, Mary Ellen Mark, Timothy O'Sullivan, Jacob A. Rees, Ian Isaacs, David Epstein, Carl Struess, Sally Mann, P.H. Emerson, Ansel Adams, Liu Ban Nong, Berenice Abbott, Susan Lipper, Dorothy Lange, James Ballock, Doris Ullman, William Henry Fox Talbot, John Thompson, Philippe Halsman, Morris Engel, Christopher Eve, Thomas Annan, Alexander Rodchenko, Elliot Elsiophon, Eugene Adjé, Clarence John Laughlin, Arthur Leipzig, F. Hollanday, Jack English, Alice Austin, Bruce Davidson, Eudora Welty, Jimmy Hare, Ruth Orkin, Masahiko Yoshioka, Paul Outerbridge Jr., Jerry N. Ulsman, Louis-Jacques Mondaguer, Emmett Gowen, Carrie Wasserman, Susan Meselas, Naomi Savage, Henry Peach Robinson, Sandra Eleta, Boris Ignatovich, Eva Rubenstein, Weetzie, Arthur Fellig, Benjamin Stone, Andre Kertész, Stephen Shore, Lee Miller, Sid Grossman, Donegan Cumming, Jack Welpott, David Sims, Detlef Orlop, Untitled, Margaret Burke-White, Dimitri Kessel, Val Telberg, Pat Blue, Francisco Infante, Jed Fielding, John Hartfield, Elliot Porter, Gabriele and Helmut Noth-Helfer, Francis Brugier, Jerome Leibling, Eugene Richards, Werner Bischoff, Martin Munkashki, Bruno Barbie, Linda Connor, Oliver Gagliani, Arno Raphael Minkinen, Richard Margolis, Judith Golden, Philip Traeger, Scott Hyde, Willard Van Dyke, Eileen Cowan, Nader, Gaspard Felix Tournachon, Roger Mertin, Lucas Samaras, Raoul Hausmann, Wilhelm Kritz, Lisette Model, Robert Leverant, Joseph Sudek, Glenn Lutchford, Edna Bullock, Susan Rankaitis, Gail Scoff, Frank Hurley, Bank Langmore, Carrie Mae Weems, Michael Bishop, Albert and Jean Seaberger, John Gutman, Kipton Kumler, Joel Sternfield, Derek Bennett, William Clift, Erica Leonard, Arthur Siegel, Marcia Resnick, Clarence H. White, Fritz Henle, Julio Etchart, Fritz Goro, E.J. Belloc, Nathan Lyons, Ralph Gibson, Leon Levenstein, Elaine Mays, Arthur Tess, William Larson, Duane Michaels, Benno Friedman, Eve Sonneman, Mark Cohen, Joyce Tennyson, John Fowle, Doug Prince, Albert Sands Southworth and Josiah Johnson Hawes, Robert F. Fitcher, George A. Tice, John Collier, Anton Brühl, Paul Martin, Tina Barney, Bob Willoughby, Stephen Shabo, Paul Caponigro, Gilles Perez, Robert Heineken, Wright Morris, Inez van Lamsweelde, Peter Hujar, Inga Morris, Judith Joy Ross, Judy Dater, Melissa Shook, Bea Nettles, Dmitri Baltamants, Karl Blossfeld, Alexander Lieberman, Wolfgang Tillmans, Hans Namuth, Bill Burke, Marion Palfy, Jan Groover, Peter Keatman, Porcelain Hands, 1958, Henry Vessel Jr., Syl Lebrot, Gilles Herman, Tana Hoban, Martine Frank, John Dominus, Ilse Bing, Joanne Callis, Lou Bernstein, Venud Matadin, Todd Webb, Andre Gelbke, Chiffre 389506, Incognito 1993, Thomas F. Barrow, Robert Cumming, Joseph M., Mark Yavno, Todd Papa George, Ruth Bernard, Charles Sheeler, Tina Modotti, Zofia Rydet, M. Alvarez Bravo, William Henry Jackson, Peter Tooming, Betty Hahn, T.S. Nagarajan, Meridal Rubenstein, Romano Cagnoni, Robert Mapplethorpe, Albert Regner Patch, Stasis Zvergdas, George Winningham, Thomas Joshua Cooper, Eric Hartman, Oscar Bailey, Herbert List, Mirella Ricciardi, Franco Fontana, Art Kane, Georgi Zelma, Sergei Mikhailovich, Prukhodin Gorski, Mario Sorrenti, Craig McDean, René Boury, David Douglas Duncan, Dazio Secchiaroli, Joseph D. Jackna, Richard Balthaus, Richard Misrash, Yoshihiko Ito, Mina White, Ellen Auerbach, Isis, Deborah Turbeville, Arnold Newman, Zaki Ostrovsky, Joel Peter Witken, Adam Fuss, Inga Oswald, Enzo Ragazzini, Bill Owens, Soina Noskoviak, David Lawrence Leventhal, Mariana Yampolsky, Jürgen Teller, Nancy Honey, Elliot Irvitt, Bill Witt, Taizo Ichinose, Nicholas Nixon, Alan A. Dutton, Henry Callahan, Joel Merovitz, William A. Garnett, Ulf Sjostedt, Hiroshi Sugimoto, Tony Frissell, John Blakemore, Roman Vishniak, Debbie Fleming Caffrey, Raul Corrales, Georgi Kepes, Joe Deal, David P. Bales, Michael Snow, Alexander Chris Vobokli, Paul Bowen, Laura Gilpin, Andy Warhol, Tuia Lydia Elizabeth Lindstrom Caldwell, Corinne Day, Kirsten McMenemy, Danny Leon, Eric Salomon, Desiree Charnay, Paul Kvilecki, Carol Beckwith, George Sitchison, Sailing Ships in an Ice Field, 1869. W. Eugene Smith, William Klein, Jose Ortiz Echagui, Edward Muybridge, and David Octavius Hill, August Sander, Antlitz der Zeit, Herbert Bayer, Man Ray, Alex Webb, Francis B. Johnston, Russell Lee, Susie Lake, Jack Delano, Diane Cook, Heinrich Ziller, Liala Kuznetsova, Miodrag Diordevi, Terry Fincher, Yul Meyerowitz, John R. Gossage, Barbara Morgan, Eduard Buba, Orst P. Horst, Hippolyte Bayard, Albert Kahn, Karen Helen Knorr, Carlotta M. Corpon, Abigail Heyman, Marion Post Walcott, Lillian Bassman, Henry Holmes Smith, Constantine Manos, Guillaume Milly, Michael Nichols, Roger Fenton, Adolphe de Meyer, Van Darren Koch, Barbara Asman, Richard Kirstel, William Notman, Kenneth Josephson, Louise Dahl-Wolfe, Joseph Kudelka, Sarah E. Charlesworth, Erman Blumenfeld, Jacques-Henri Latigue, Perkle Jones, Edward Steichen, George Hurrell, Steve Fitch, Lady Hawarden, Helmar Lersky, Oscar Gustav Raylander, John Thompson, Irving Penn, and Jane Evelyn Atwood, photographs of children at the National School for Blind Youth. Not to mention Susie Randall, Art Wolfe, Charles and Rita Summers, Tom and Pat Leeson, Michael H. Francis, John Botkin, Dan Blackburn, Barbara S., Irwin and Peggy Bauer, Peter Arnold, Gerald Lack, James Wojcik, Dan Boris, Melanie Acevedo, Michael McLaughlin, Darren Haddad, William Vasquez, J. Michael Myers, Rosa and Rosa, Patricia McDonough, Aldo Rossi, Mark Weiss, Craig Cutler, David Barry, Chris Sanders, Neil Brown, James Schneff, Kevin Wilkes, Ron Simmons, Chip Clark, Ron Kerber, Kevin Downey, Nick Nichols, also Eric Ader, Drew Campion, Les Walker, Rob Gilly, Don King, Jeff Hornbaker, Alexander Gallardo, Russell Hoover, Jeff Flint, Chris Van Lennep, Mike Moir, Brent Humble, Ivan Ferrer, Don James, John Callahan, Bill Morris, Kimiro Kondo, Leonard Brady, Fred Swagles, Eric Baseman Suchia, Darrell Wong, Warren Bolster, Joseph Libby, Russell Hoover, Peter Frieden, Craig Peterson, Ted Grambeau, Gordino, Steve Wilkins, Mike Foley, Kevin Welsh, Leroy Granis, John Bilderback, Craig Finneman, Michael Grosfent, Craig Huglin, Seamus Mercado, John Heath, Doc Ball, Tom Boyle, Rob Keith, Vince Cavatiao, Jeff Devine, Aaron Lloyd, Chris DeBall, Steve Fox, George Greenick, Aaron Lloyd, Ron Stoner, Jason Childs, Kin Kimoto, Chris DeBall, Rob Barber, John Witzig, Ben Siegfried, Ron Romanowski, Brian Bielman, Dave Bjorn, John Severson, Martin Thick. See his profound shot of Dana Fisher cradling a chimpanzee rescued from a meat vendor in Zaire. Doug Cockwell, Art Brewer, Fred Swegles, Eric Hans, Mike Balzer, John Scott, Rob Brown, Bernie Baker, William Sharp, Randy Johnson, Nick Puget, Tom Servais, Dennis Jr., Eric Baseman, Sylvain Cazenave, Woody Woodworth, and of course J.C. Hemmant, David Chim Seymour, Vu Ngoc Dong, William Dinwiddie, James Burton, Marv Wolfe, London Thorne, John Gallo, Nguyen Hui, Leonidas Stanson, Famco Fak, Cadlin Herbert, Underwood and Underwood, James H. Hare, Tran Oe Dung, Lucian S. Kirtland, Edmund Ratisbon, Pham Tran, Long Tan Tuk, George Strock, Joe Rosenthal, Ralph Morse, Ho Van Dee, Nguyen Nut Hua, Nguyen Van Chien, Nguyen Van Thang, Phuc Quang Liem, Trong Phu Thien, John Floria, George Silk, Carl Maidans, Pham Vong Quang, Nguyen Kak Tam, Vu Hong Dung, Nguyen Van Nang, Yevgeny Kalde, To Din, Ho Ka, Hank Walker, Tran Ngoc Dang, Vo De Kiep, Trin Din Hai, Howard Breedlove, Nguyen Van Thuan, Vu Han, Lee Van Kao, Burr McIntosh, Ho Van Tu, Helen Levitt, Robert Kappa, Lee Eng, Matthew Brady, Sao Van, Toi Hu, Leng, Tong Viasna, Nguyen Long Nam, Huyen Van Hu, Ngoc Huong, Alan Hirons, Lek, George J. Denoncourt II, Huang Chao, Eric Wiegand, Pham Vu Bin, Gilles Caron, Tran Bin Quoll, Gerald Kringle, Lee Doi Quay, Tan Tin, Frederick Sommer, Win Van T, Robert Moser, Chim Sarath, Duong Tan Van, Howard Nuremberger, Vo Ngoc Can, Dang Van Hang, James Pardue, Bui Din Thi, Doug Clifford, Chan San Hee, Nguyen Va Ta, Kizaburo Shimamoto, Win Van Ung, Bob Hodiern, Nguyen Viet Hin, Din Day, Son Heng, T. Moonface Kim Hyang, Ling Nan, Charles Chalapa, Tay Din, Win Van Nu, Ngoc Du, John and the Scavenge, Win Van Huang, Francis Bailey, George Gens Sluckner, Vo Van Nong, James Dennis Gill, Huyn Van Dung, Win Tan Heen, Terence Koo, Paul Schutzer, Vo Van Key, Malcolm Brown, Lee Kak Tam, Huyn Van Huang, Do Van Nan, Franz Dalma, Kiyoshi Sawada, Willie Metler, James Lohr, Lee Kia, Sam K. Fei, Frank Lee, Win Van Man, Joseph Tourtelot, Don Phi Hung, T. Man Ni, Win Ngoc Tu, Lee T. Nang, Win Van Chin, Doug Woods, Glenn Rasmussen, Hiromichi Mine, Duong Kok Tin, Bernard B. Fall, Randall Reamer, Long Gai Dung, Bill Hackwell, Penn, Win Duc Tan, Che Ho, Jerry Wingarden, Vantha, Chip Morey, Jay Gonzalez, Pierre Jahan, Catherine Leroy, Leonard Heckel, Kim Van Tok, W.B. Bass Jr., Sean Flynn, Heng Ho, Dana Stone, Win Dung, Landon K. Thorne II, Gerard Hebert, Michel Laurent, Robert Jackson Ellison, Pat Sofin, Win Truck Din, Huyn Van Tree, Neil K. Hulbert, James McJunkin, Lee Din Du, Chor Vuti, Claude Arpin Pont, Raymond Martinoff, Jean Perrault, Win Huang Nam, Dickie Chappelle, Lan Don Rar, Brian Grigsby, Henri Huet, Uwin Tang Mi, Peter Ronald Van Thiel, Everett Dixie Reese, Jerry A. Rose, Oliver E. Noonan, Kim Savath, Bernard Morin, Quy Saran, Do Van Vu, Win Man Heu, Charles Richard Eggleston, Sane Hell, Win Owen Liet, Dick Durrance, Vu Van Gyang, Bernard Kohlenberg, Sue Vichith, Ronald D. Gallagher, Dan Dodd, Francois Sully, Kent Potter, Alfred Batungbakal, Dieter Bellendorf, Nick Mills, Ronald L. Heiberle, Terry Reynolds, Leroy Massey, Sam Caston, Al Chang, Philip R. Boehm, and finally Eddie Adams, Charles Hoff, Larry Burroughs, and Don McCullin, American soldiers tending wounded child in a cellar of a house by candlelight, 1968. Subnote: Alison Adrian Burns, another Zampana reader, told me this list was entirely random. With the possible exception of Brassaï, Speen, Bush, and Link, Zampana was not very familiar with photographers. We just picked the names out of some books and magazines he had lying around, Burns told me. I'd describe a picture or two, and he'd say no, or he'd say fine. A few times he just told me to choose a page and point. Hey, whatever he wanted to do. That was what I was there for. Sometimes, though, he just wanted to hear about the LA scene, what was happening, what wasn't, the gloss, the names of clubs and bars, that sort of thing. As far as I know, that list never got written down. End subnote. End note. As Navidson takes his first step through that immense arch, he is suddenly a long way away from the warm light of the living room. In fact, his creep into that place resembles the eerie path required for any deep-sea exploration, the beam of his flashlight scratching at nothing but the invariant blackness. Navidson keeps his attention focused on the floor ahead of him, and no doubt because he keeps looking down, the floor begins to assume a new meaning. It can no longer be taken for granted. Perhaps something lies beneath it. Perhaps it will open up into some deep fissure. Suddenly, immutable silence rushes in to replace what had momentarily shattered it. Navidson freezes, unsure whether or not he really just heard something growl. I better be able to find my way back, he finally whispers, which, though probably muttered in jest, suddenly catches him off guard. Navidson swiftly turns around. Much to his horror, he can no longer see the arch, let alone the wall. He has walked beyond the range of his light. In fact, no matter where he points the flashlight, the only thing he can perceive is oily darkness. Even worse, his panicked turn and the subsequent absence of any landmarks has made it impossible for him to remember which direction he just came from. "Oh God," he blurts, creating odd repeats in the distance. He twists around again. "Hey!" he shouts, spawning a multitude of "A's," then rotates 45 degrees and yells, "Balls!" A long moment of silence follows before he hears the faint halls racing back through the dark. After several more such turns, he discovers a loud "easy" returns "A-Z" with the least amount of delay. This is the direction he decides on, and within less than a minute, the beam from his flashlight finds something more than darkness. Quickening his pace slightly, Navidson reaches the wall and the safety he perceives there. He now faces another decision, left or right. This time, before going anywhere, he reaches into his pocket and places a penny at his feet. Relying on this marker, he heads left for a while. When a minute passes and he has still failed to find the entrance, he returns to the penny. Now he moves off to the right and very quickly comes across a doorway. Only this one, as we can see, is much smaller and has a different shape than the one he originally came through. He decides to keep walking. When a minute passes and he still has not found the arch, he stops. "Think, Navy, think," he whispers to himself, his voice edged slightly with fear. Again, that faint growl returns, rolling through the darkness like thunder. Navidson quickly does an about-face and returns to the doorway. Only now he discovers that the penny he left behind, which should have been at least 100 feet further, lies directly before him. Even stranger, the doorway is no longer the doorway, but the arch he had been looking for all along. Unfortunately, as he steps through it, he immediately sees how drastically everything has changed. The corridor is now much narrower and ends very quickly in a T. He has no idea which way to go, and when a third growl ripples through that place, this time significantly louder, Navidson panics and starts to run. His sprint, however, lasts only a few seconds. He realizes quickly enough that it is a useless, even dangerous course of action. Catching his breath and doing his best to calm his frayed nerves, he tries to come up with a better plan. "Karen," he finally shouts, a flurry of "errands" almost instantly swallowed in front of him. "Tom," he tries, briefly catching hold of the "oms" as they too start to vanish, though before doing so completely, Navidson momentarily detects in the last a slightly higher pitch entwined in his own voice. He waits a moment, and not hearing anything else, shouts again, "I'm in here," giving rise to tripping "in ears," reverberating and fading, until in the next to last instant a sharp cry comes back to him, a child's cry, calling out for him, drawing him to the right. By shouting "I'm here," and following the "Addies" singing off the walls, Navidson slowly begins to make his way through an incredibly complex and frequently disorienting series of turns. Eventually, after backtracking several times and making numerous wrong choices, occasionally descending into disturbing territories of silence, the voice begins to grow noticeably louder, until finally Navidson slips around a corner, certain he has found his way out. Instead, though, he encounters only more darkness, and this time greater quiet. His breathing quickens. He is uncertain which way to go. Obviously, he is afraid. And then, quite abruptly, he steps to the right through a low passageway and discovers a corridor terminating in warm yellow light, lamplight, with a tiny silhouette standing in the doorway, tugging her daddy home with a cry. Emerging into the safety of his own living room, Navidson immediately scoops Daisy up in his arms and gives her a big hug. "I had a nightmare," she says, with a very serious nod. similar to the Khumbu icefall at the base of Mount Everest, where blue seracs and chasms change unexpectedly throughout the day and night. Navidson is the first one to discover how that place also seems to constantly change. Unlike the icefall, however, not even a single hairline fracture appears in those walls. Absolutely nothing visible to the eye provides a reason for, or even evidence of, those terrifying shifts which can, in a matter of moments, reconstitute a simple path into an extremely complicated one. Note: nothing visible to the eye provides a reason. A fitting phrase for what's happened. And to think my day actually started off pretty well. I woke up having an almost wet dream about Thumper. She was doing this crazy Margareta Gertruida Zeller dance, veil after colored veil thrown aside, though oddly enough never landing, rather flying around her as if she were in the middle of some kind of gentle twister, these sheer sheets of fabric continuing to encircle her, even as she removes more and more of them, allowing me only momentary glimpses of her body, her smooth skin, her mouth, her waist, her... Ah yes, I get a glimpse of that too. And I'm moving towards her, moving past all that interference, certain that with every step I take I'll soon have her. After all, she's almost taken everything off. No, she has taken everything off. Her knees are spreading apart. Just a few more veils to get past, and I'll be able to see her. Not just bits and pieces of her, but all of her, no longer molested by all this nonsense. In fact, I'm there already, which means I'm about to enter her, which apparently is enough to blow the circuit, hit the switch, prohibit that sublime and much anticipated conclusion, leaving me blind in the daylight stream pouring through my window. Fuck. I go off to cuff in the shower. At least the water's hot and there's enough steam to fog the mirror. Afterwards, I pack my pipe and light up. Wake and bake. More like wash and bake. Half a bowl of cereal and a shot of bourbon later, I'm there, my friendly haze having finally arrived. I'm ready for work. Parking's easy to find, on Vista. I jog up to Sunset, even jog up the stairs, practically skipping past the by appointment only sign. Why skipping? Because as I step into the shop, I know I'm not even 1 minute late, which is not usually the case for me. The expression on my boss's face reveals just how astonishing an achievement this is. I couldn't care less about him. I want to see Thumper. I want to find out if she's really wearing any of that diaphanous rainbow fabric I was dreaming about. Of course, she's not there, but that doesn't get me down. I'm still optimistic she'll arrive. And if not today, why, fuck, tomorrow's just another day away. A sentiment I could almost sing. I immediately sit down at the side counter and start working, mainly because I don't want to deal with my boss, which could mean jeopardizing my good mood. Of course, he couldn't care less about me or my mood. He approaches, clearing his throat. He will talk. He will ruin everything. Except it suddenly penetrates that chalky material he actually insists on calling his brain, that I'm building his precious points. And sure enough, this insight prohibits his trap from opening, and he leaves me alone. Points are basically clusters of needles used to shade the skin. They are necessary because a single point amounts to a prick not much bigger than this period. Okay, maybe a little bigger. Anyway, 5 needles go into what's called a 5, 7 for 7s, and so on, all soldered together towards the base. I actually enjoy making them. There's something pleasant about concentrating on the subtle details, the precision required, constantly checking and rechecking to assure yourself that yes, indeed, the sharps are level, in the correct arrangement, ready at last to be fixed in place with dots of hot solder. Then I recheck all my rechecking. The points must not be too close, nor too far apart, nor skewed in any way, and only then, if I'm satisfied, which I usually am, though take heed, usually does not always mean always, will I scrub the shafts and put them aside to be sterilized later in the ultrasound or autoclave. My boss may think I can't draw worth shit, but he knows I build needles better than anyone. He calls me all the time on my tardiness, my tendency to drift and moither, and of course, the odds that I'll ever get to tattoo anything. Johnny, nothing you do, shaking his head, No one's ever going to want to make permanent, unless they're crazy. And let me tell you something, Johnny, crazies never pay. But about my needle making, I've never heard him complain once. Anyway, a couple of hours whiz by. I'm finishing up a batch of fives, my boss's cluster of choice, when he finally speaks, telling me to pull some bottles of black and purple ink and fill a few caps while I'm at it. We keep the stuff in a storeroom in back. It's a sizable space, big enough to fit a small work table in. You have to climb 8 pretty steep steps to reach it. That's where we stock all the extras, and we have extras for almost everything, except light bulbs. For some reason, my boss hasn't picked up any extra light bulbs in a while. Today, of course, I flick the switch and flash, blam, pop. Okay, scratch the blam. The storeroom bulb burns out. I recommence flicking, as if such insistent, highly repetitive, and at this point pointless action could actually resurrect the light. It doesn't. The switch has been rendered meaningless, forcing me to feel my way around in the dark. I keep the door open so I can see okay, but it still takes me a while to negotiate the shadows before I can locate the caps and ink. By now, the sweet effects of my dream, to say nothing of the soft thrumming delivered care of alcohol and Oregon bud, have worn off, though I still continue to think about Thumper, slowly coming to grips with the fact that she won't be visiting today. This causes my spirits to drop substantially until I realize I have no way of knowing that for certain. After all, there's still half a day left. No, she's not coming. I know it. I can feel it in my gut. That's okay. Fuck that. I start filling caps with purple, concentrating on its texture, the strange hue, imagining I can actually observe the rapid pulse of its bandwidth. These are stupid thoughts, and as if to confirm that sentiment, darkness pushes in on me. Suddenly the slash of light on my hands looks sharp enough to cut me, real sharp. Move, and it will cut me. I do move, and guess what? I start to bleed. The laceration isn't deep, but important stuff has been struck, leaking over the table and floor. Lost. I don't have long. Except I'm not bleeding, though I am breathing hard, real hard. I don't need to touch my face to know there are now beads of sweat slipping off my forehead, flicking off my eyelids, streaming down the back of my neck. Cold as hands of the dead. Something terrible is going on here. Going extremely wrong. Get out, I think. I want to get out, but I can't move. Then, as if this were nothing but a grim prelude, shit really starts to happen. There's that awful taste again, sharp as rust, wrapping around my tongue. Worse, I'm no longer alone. Impossible. Not impossible. This time, it's human. Maybe not. Extremely long fingers. A sucking sound too. Sucking on teeth. Teeth already torn from the gums. I don't know how I know this, but it's already too late. I've seen the eyes. The eyes. They have no whites. I haven't seen this. The way they glisten red. Then it begins reaching for me, slowly unfolding itself out of its corner. Mad meat, all of it. But I understand. These eyes are full of blood. Except I'm only looking at shadows and shelves. Of course, I'm alone. And then behind me, the door closes. The rest is in pieces. A scream, a howl, a roar. All's warping or splintering. That makes no sense. There's a terrible banging. The air's rank with stench. At least that's not a mystery. I know the source. Boy, do I ever. I've shit myself. Pissed myself too. I can't believe it. Urine soaking into my pants, fecal matter running down the back of my legs. I'm caught in it. Must run and hide from it. but I still can't move. In fact, the more I try to escape, the less I can breathe. The more I try to hold on, the less I can focus. Something's leaving me. Parts of me. Everything falls apart. Stories heard but not recalled. Letters too. Words filling my head, fragmenting like artillery shells. Shrapnel like syllables flying everywhere. Terrible syllables, sharp, cracked, traveling at murderous speed, tearing through it all in a very, very bad, perhaps even irreparable way. Known. Some. Call. Is. Air. Am. Incoherent. Yes. Without meaning. I'm afraid not. The shape of a shape of a shape of a face disassembling right before my eyes. What wail embattled break, like a hawk, another Malden or no Malden at all, on snowy days or not snowy at all, far beyond the edge of any reasonable awareness. This is what it feels like to be really afraid. Though of course it didn't. None of this can truly approach the reality of that fear, there in the midst of all that bedlam, like the sound of a heart or some unholy blast, desperate and dying, slamming, no, banging into the thin wall of my inner ear, paper thin in fact, attempting to shatter inside what had already been shattered long ago. I should be dead. Why am I still here? And as that question appears, concise, in order, properly accented, I see I'm holding onto the tray loaded with all those caps and bottles of black and purple ink. Not only that, but I'm already walking as fast as I can through the doorway. The door is open, though I did not open it. I stub my toe. I'm falling down the stairs, tripping over myself, hurling the tray in the air, the caps, the ink, all of it, floating now above me, as my hands, independent of anything I might have thought to suggest, reach up to protect my head. Something hisses and slashes out at the back of my neck. It doesn't matter. Down I go, head first, somersaulting down those 8 pretty steep steps, a wild blur, leaving me to passively note the pain spots as they happen, shoulders, hip, elbows, even as I, also at the same time, remain dimly aware of so much ink coming down like a bad rain, splattering around me, everywhere, covering me, even the tray hitting me, though that doesn't hurt, the caps scattering across the floor, and of course the accompanying racket. Telling my boss, telling them all, whoever else was there. What? Not that it was over. It wasn't. Not yet. The wind's knocked out of me. It's not coming back. Here's where I die, I think. And it's true. I'm possessed by the premonition of what will be, what has to be, my inevitable asphyxiation. At least that's what they see, my boss and crew, as they come running to the back, called there by all that clatter and mess. What they can't see, though, is the omen seen in a fall, my fall, as I'm doused in black ink, my hands now completely covered, and see the floor is black, and, have you anticipated this, or should I be more explicit? Jet on jet. For a blinding instant I have watched my hand vanish. In fact, all of me has vanished. One hell of a disappearing act, too. The already foreseen dissolution of the self, lost without contrast, slipping into oblivion, until, mid-gasp, I catch sight of my reflection in the back of the tray, the ghost in the way. Seems I'm not gone, not quite. My face has been splattered with purple, as have my arms, granting contrast, and thus defining me, marking me, and at least for the moment, preserving me. Suddenly I can breathe, and with each breath the terror rapidly dissipates. My boss, however, is scared shitless. "Jesus Christ, Johnny," he says. "Are you okay? What happened?" Can't you see I've shit myself? I think to shout. But now I see that I haven't. Except for the ink blotting my threads, my pants are bone dry. I mumble something about how much my toe hurts. He takes that to mean I'm all right and won't try to sue him from a wheelchair. Later, a patron points out the long bloody scratch on the back of my neck. I'm unable to respond. Now, though, I realize what I should have said. In the spirit of the dark, in the spirit of the staircase. Known some call is am, which is to say, I am not what I used to be. Subnote. Though Mr. Truant's asides may often seem impenetrable, they are not without rhyme or reason. The reader who wishes to interpret Mr. Truant on his or her own may disregard this note. Those, however, who feel they would profit from a better understanding of his past may wish to proceed ahead and read his father's obituary in Appendix 2D, as well as those letters written by his institutionalized mother in Appendix 2E. Editors. End subnote. End note. After putting his daughter back to bed, Navidson finds Karen standing in the entrance to their room. "What's the matter?" she murmurs, still half asleep. "Go back to sleep. Daisy just had a bad dream." Navidson starts to go back downstairs. "I'm sorry, Navy," Karen says quietly. "I'm sorry I got so mad. It's not your fault. That thing just scares me. Come back to bed." And as they later confide in separate video entries, that night, for the first time in weeks, they made love again, their descriptions running the gamut of anything from gentle and comforting to familiar and very satisfying. Their bodies had repaired what words never tried to, and at least for a little while they felt close again. The next morning, with harmony now restored, Navidson cannot bring himself to tell Karen about his visit. Fortunately, having nearly gotten lost inside his own house, has for the moment diminished his appetite for its darkness. He promises to turn over the initial investigation to Billy Reston. "Then we'll call the New York Times, Larry King, whoever, and we'll move. End of story." Karen responds to his offer with kisses, clinging to his hand. A stability of sorts, once again returning to their lives. Still, the compromise is far from satisfying. As Karen records on her hi8, "I told Navy I'll stay for the first look in there, but I've also called Mum. I want to get out of here as soon as possible." Navidson admits in his, "I feel lousy about lying to Karen, but I think it's unreasonable of her to expect me not to investigate. She knows who I am, I think." At which point, the study door suddenly swings open and Daisy, wearing a red and gold dress, barges in and begins tugging on her father's sleeve. "Come play with me, Daddy." Navidson lifts his daughter onto his lap. "Okay, what do you want to play?" "I don't know," she shrugs. "Always." "What's always?" But before she can answer, he starts tickling her around the neck, and Daisy dissolves into bursts of delight. Despite the tremendous amount of material generated by Exploration A, no one has ever commented on the game Daisy wants to play with her father, perhaps because everyone assumes it is either a request to play always, or just a childish neologism. Then again, always slightly mispronounces hallways. It also echoes it.